The acrid smell of smoke and plasma fire hung in the air as Sergeant Alex Reed crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a transport vehicle. His breathing came in short, controlled bursts, each exhale creating small clouds in the frigid air of this godforsaken moon. 3 days since the evacuation order. 3 days since the last transport had lifted off, leaving behind anyone unfortunate enough to miss the final call. 3 days alone, or so he'd thought. The sound that had first caught his attention was barely perceptible over the distant rumble of artillery fire, a soft whimper, almost childlike. Following it had led him to a collapsed section of prefab housing units where the colony scientists had lived. The sight that greeted him there had stopped him cold. She was small, maybe reaching his chest if she stood at full height, though now she was huddled in on herself, her slender limbs wrapped protectively around her body. Her skin was a pale lavender that seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim emergency lighting, covered in delicate patterns that might have been natural or might have been cultural markings. Reed couldn't tell. 2 large eyes dominated her face, iridescent and unblinking as they fixed on him with unmistakable terror. "Hey there," he said softly, lowering his pulse rifle and slowly raising his empty hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien girl didn't respond, just pressed herself further back against the wall. Reed noticed a dark stain on her side. Blood, or whatever passed for it in her species. The wound looked bad. "You're hurt," he said, taking a cautious step forward. "I can help." 3 days later, Reed found himself fashioning a makeshift shelter in the ruins of what had once been the colony's hydroponics lab. The glass dome overhead was partially shattered, but enough remained intact to keep out the worst of the freezing rain that had begun to fall. The alien girl, who he'd started calling Lilac for lack of any better name, was curled up on his thermal blanket, watching his every move with those unsettling eyes. "Base rations," Reed explained, tearing open a pouch and offering her half. "Not exactly 5-star cuisine, but it'll keep you going." To his surprise, she reached out and took it, her 6-fingered hand moving with deliberate caution. Her movements were still weak from blood loss, but the emergency med gel he'd applied to her wounds seemed to be working. Whatever her species was, they were compatible enough with human medical supplies that she hadn't died yet. That was something. "So, what's your story?" Reed asked conversationally as she nibbled at the protein bar. "How'd you end up left behind when everyone bugged out?" Lilac tilted her head slightly, a gesture that reminded Reed uncomfortably of a bird of prey. Then, to his shock, she spoke, her voice a melodic series of clicks and trills that his translator implant struggled to process. "They left. Purpose." Reed froze mid-bite. "You speak English." "You learn. Watching. Listening." She touched her throat with one slender finger. "Not. Same sounds." Translator. Broken. Reed sat back on his heels, processing this new information. "They left you on purpose. Your own people." Her eyes clouded over with something that might have been sorrow. "Not. People. Test. Subject." A cold feeling settled in Reed's stomach that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. The research facility. Of course. The colony had been established ostensibly for scientific exploration, but there had always been rumors about what went on in the restricted sections. Sections that military grunts like him weren't allowed to enter. "They were experimenting on you," he said, the words not a question. Lilac's gaze dropped to the makeshift bandage on her side. "Make better. Stronger. Failed." Reed cursed under his breath. The evacuation order had come suddenly. Enemy forces breaking through the orbital defenses, everyone scrambling to the transports. In the chaos, it would have been easy to leave behind evidence that might raise uncomfortable questions back home. Evidence like an alien test subject. "Well," Reed said, checking his rifle's charge indicator, "out of habit, their loss is my gain, I guess. 2 survivors is better than 1. The distant rumble of artillery had grown closer over the past few hours. Reed knew what that meant. The enemy forces were advancing, systematically sweeping through the abandoned colony. It was only a matter of time before they reached this sector. "We can't stay here," he said, more to himself than to Lilac. "Need to find somewhere more defensible." "Why?" "Help," Lilac asked, her voice stronger now, the translation coming through more clearly. "Your kind. Hurt. Your kind. Leave." Reed met her gaze, unsure how to answer. Why was he helping her? Military protocol was clear. In evacuation scenarios, non-essential personnel were to be left behind if necessary. An alien prisoner, or test subject, definitely qualified as non-essential. "Because I got left behind too," he finally said. "And I figure we've got better odds together than apart." A series of explosions lit up the night sky, closer than before. Reed quickly gathered their meager supplies, slinging his pack over one shoulder and helping Lilac to her feet. She swayed slightly but remained standing, her determination evident in the set of her jaw. "Can you walk?" he asked. In response, she took a step forward, then another, each movement becoming more confident. "Yes." "Good," Reed said, scanning the ruined landscape through the cracked dome. "Because we got a long way to go." As they slipped out of the hydroponics lab into the shadow-filled ruins of the colony, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. Every instinct honed by years of military service told him to abandon the alien, to focus on his own survival. She was wounded, slowing him down, and completely unknown. A potential threat. But as Lilac's slender hand gripped his arm for support, Reed made his choice. In a world where both humans and aliens had abandoned her, he would not, even if it cost him everything. The first shots rang out just as they reached the edge of the compound, tracers cutting through the darkness like deadly fireworks. Reed pulled Lilac behind a concrete barrier, his heart pounding in his chest. The enemy had arrived, and they weren't alone. Reed's combat instincts took over as he pressed Lilac deeper into the shadow of the barrier. The distinctive high-pitched whine of pulse rifles, not human-made, echoed through the ruins. Whoever was hunting them wasn't from Earth forces. "Don't move," he whispered, pulling his sidearm and checking the charge. 3/4 full. Not great, but it would have to do. His main rifle had more firepower, but the telltale glow from its barrel would give away their position in seconds. Lilac's breathing had quickened, each exhale creating small puffs of condensation in the cold air. Her eyes, wide and reflective in the darkness, fixed on his face with an intensity that made Reed uncomfortable. There was intelligence there, and fear. "They find me," she whispered, her translator struggling with the urgent tone. "Always find." Reed frowned. "What do you mean? Who are they?" Before she could answer, a spotlight swept across the rubble 20 meters to their left. Reed instinctively pulled Lilac down lower, his body tensing as the beam of light passed just above their hiding place. "Zrekta," Lilac breathed, the word untranslatable. "Hunters." Through the gaps in the concrete, Reed caught glimpses of the search party, 4 figures moving with disciplined precision through the ruins. They weren't human, that much was clear from their proportions. Taller, broader across the shoulders, with an odd rolling gait that reminded Reed of predatory animals. Their armor gleamed dully in the artificial light, decorated with what looked like trophies, small bones, and metal tags that rattled softly as they moved. "Friends of yours," Reed muttered, trying to keep his voice light despite the cold dread pooling in his stomach. Lilac's expression hardened. "Not friends. Owners." The word hung between them as Reed processed its implications. "They're slavers?" "Worse," she replied, her voice stronger now. "Collectors. Rare things, valuable things." A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "That's why our scientists had you. They bought you from these collectors." Lilac nodded once, her eyes never leaving the hunting party. "Trade. Knowledge for specimen." Reed swallowed his disgust. The more he learned about the research outpost, the less sorry he felt about its destruction. He'd been stationed here for 8 months, guarding scientists he believed were working on agricultural adaptations for harsh environments. The reality was far uglier. "Well," he whispered, "I'm not letting them collect you again." Another spotlight swept dangerously close, and Reed held his breath until it passed. They were pinned down, outgunned, and the hunters were methodically working their way through the area. It wouldn't be long before they were discovered. "We need a distraction," Reed muttered, scanning their surroundings for options. His gaze settled on the colony's emergency generator, still sputtering power to parts of the ruined facility. If he could overload it, the explosion might give them cover to escape in the opposite direction. "I need to reach that generator," he said, pointing. "When it blows, we run for the underground maintenance tunnels. They connect to the old mining shafts." Lilac's expression was unreadable. "You? Help still. Why?" The question caught Reed off guard. Why was he risking his life for an alien he'd just met? He should be focusing on his own survival, finding a way to signal for extraction. Instead, he was planning to engage with unknown hostiles to protect someone. Something that wasn't even human. "Because it's the right thing to do," he finally said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. There was more to it than that, but he couldn't articulate it. Maybe it was spiked toward the scientists who had treated her like property. Maybe it was the loneliness of being the last human on this godforsaken moon. Or maybe it was the simple fact that when she looked at him, he didn't see an alien. He saw a person who needed help. Lilac studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if she'd made a decision. "I help distraction." Before Reed could protest, she picked up a piece of broken metal and hurled it with surprising strength toward the far side of the compound. It clattered loudly against a fallen strut, the sound echoing in the quiet night. The effect was immediate. 3 of the hunters swung toward the noise, their spotlights converging on the area. The 4th, seemingly the leader, barked an order in a language that reminded Reed of grinding stones. "Now," Lilac hissed, pushing Reed toward the generator. He moved low and fast, darting between piles of debris as the hunters investigated the sound. The generator was housed in a small structure that had partially collapsed, but the main control panel was still accessible. Reed knelt before it, wiping dust from the display. The system was running at minimal capacity, redirecting power to essential systems. Perfect. With practiced movements, Reed bypassed the safety protocols and began rerouting power in a dangerous feedback loop. It wouldn't be a massive explosion, but it would be enough to create chaos and hopefully buy them time to escape. As he worked, memories from his military training surfaced. Sabotage techniques, emergency protocols, extraction strategies, all designed for humans fighting human wars. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Kneeling in the ruins of a secret research facility, rigging a generator to explode while alien hunters searched for him and the test subject he was trying to protect. A soft sound behind him made Reed spin, raising his sidearm. But it was only Lilac, having followed him despite his implied instruction to stay hidden. "They closer," she warned, her voice tight with urgency. "Smell you." Reed frowned. "They can smell me. Human scent. Different. Strong." "That's great," Reed muttered, returning to the generator controls. Just a few more connections and the overload would begin. Get ready to run. The final connection made, Reed sealed the control panel and grabbed Lilac's arm. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before this blows. The maintenance access is behind that collapsed wall. We need tow." A harsh, grinding voice cut through the night, the untranslatable words carrying unmistakable menace. Turned slowly to see the largest of the hunters standing just 15 meters away, its spotlight fixed directly on them. In the harsh glare, Reed could make out details he'd missed before. The hunter's face resembled a hairless feline, with vertical pupils that contracted to slits in the bright light. A series of metal implements hung from its belt, their purpose unclear but undoubtedly unpleasant. The hunter raised what appeared to be a communication device and spoke again, its attention fixed on Lilac, with an intensity that made Reed's skin crawl. "What's it saying?" Reed whispered, slowly positioning himself between Lilac and the hunter. Lilac's voice trembled slightly. "Says, specimen damaged but salvageable. Says, human to be processed." The hunter took a step forward, unclipping one of the metal implements from its belt. Reed raised his sidearm. "Tell it to back off." Lilac's response was lost in the sudden wail of alarms as the generator behind them began its terminal sequence, emergency lights flashing throughout the compound. The hunter hesitated, its attention momentarily diverted by the unexpected development. It was all the opening Reed needed. Reed squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wide, scorching the hunter's shoulder armor. The second hit its mark, striking the creature's leg. It let out a shrieking roar that echoed through the ruins, dropping to one knee but keeping its weapon raised. "Run." Reed grabbed Lilac's arm, half dragging her toward the maintenance access as return fire sizzled past his ear, close enough that he felt the heat signature. Behind them, the generator's whine had risen to a dangerous pitch. Warning lights flashed across its housing. Red, yellow, an urgent countdown to detonation. The hunter was calling to its companions, its guttural language carrying through the night. Reed shoved aside a fallen beam blocking the maintenance hatch, revealing a dark passage leading downward. "Go first," he ordered, firing 2 more shots over his shoulder to keep the injured hunter at bay. Lilac slipped through the opening with surprising agility, her slender form disappearing into the darkness below. Reed followed, pulling the hatch closed behind him, just as the night lit up with a thunderous explosion. The concussive force rattled the entire tunnel, sending dust and debris raining down on them. "That was closer than I planned," Reed admitted, his ears ringing. The only light came from the small tactical flashlight attached to his belt, casting long shadows along the maintenance tunnel. "Not kill them," Lilac said, her luminescent eyes reflecting the meager light. "Slow only." Reed nodded grimly. "Yeah, I figured as much. These tunnels connect to the mining network. If we can reach the eastern shaft, there's an outpost we might be able to use for shelter." He didn't mention that reaching the outpost meant traveling nearly 5 kilometers through unfamiliar territory that might already be compromised. They moved as quickly as Lilac's injury would allow, the maintenance tunnel eventually opening into a larger mineshaft. Ancient tracks for ore carts ran along the floor, disappearing into the darkness ahead. The air was stale but breathable, tinged with the faint metallic smell that permeated the entire moon. "How's your wound?" Reed asked as they paused at a junction, consulting the crude map displayed on his tactical pad. The device's battery was running low, another resource they couldn't afford to waste. Lilac pressed a hand to her side. "Healing. Slow." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Why hunters not kill you immediately?" "Normally, they shoot first." Reed considered this as he studied the map. "They'd probably want to interrogate me. Find out if there are other humans around, or if I know anything about their specimen." He glanced at her meaningfully. "Why are you so valuable to them? There must be more to this than just being a rare species." Lilac was silent for so long that Reed thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Different. My kind. Not leave home world. Not willingly." She touched her temple. "I remember things. Patterns. Places. Once seen, never forgotten." "You have an eidetic memory," Reed translated. "More," she continued. "I feel energy flows. Can. Manipulate." She held out her palm, and for a brief moment, a small ball of bluish light flickered there before extinguishing. The effort seemed to cost her. She swayed slightly, her breathing becoming more labored. "That's why they want you back," Reed murmured, the pieces falling into place. "And why our scientists were so interested." Before Lilac could respond, A faint sound echoed through the tunnel behind them, the scrape of metal against stone. The hunters had survived the explosion and found their trail. "We need to move," Reed whispered, choosing the eastern passage. "And we need to find a way to throw them off our scent." They pushed deeper into the mining complex, the tunnels becoming increasingly narrow and less maintained. Twice they had to backtrack when passages ended in cave-ins. Reed's tactical pad flickered and died, leaving them with only his flashlight to navigate by. The knowledge that they were being hunted lent urgency to their movement, even as exhaustion began to slow their pace. "Tell me about your home," Reed said as they picked their way through a partially flooded section. The conversation both a distraction from their dire situation and a way to keep Lilac alert. Her steps had become unsteady, her breathing shallow. "Beautiful," she replied after a moment. "Many colors, waters that sing, cities and trees." Her voice took on a wistful quality. "My family, scholars, teachers." "How did the collectors find you?" Lilac's face darkened. "Came as friends, traders. I was curious, too curious." She stumbled, and Reed caught her arm to steady her. "I saw ship design. Could reproduce. Valuable information." Reed nodded, understanding all too well how her special abilities would make her a target. The ability to perfectly recall and reproduce advanced technology would be invaluable to any military or corporate entity. It was no wonder the collectors had gone to such lengths to capture her, or that Earth scientists had been eager to study her. A distant rumble stopped them in their tracks. Not the hunters this time, but something else. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. Seismic activity. Reed wondered aloud. The moon was known for its unstable geology, one of many reasons the colony had been established in a relatively stable zone. "No," Lilac's eyes widened. "Ships, big ships." The rumbling grew stronger, dust filtering down from the tunnel ceiling. Reed's heart sank. If Lilac was right, then either reinforcements for the hunters had arrived, or, possibly worse, Earth forces were returning to recover something from the colony. Either way, their chances of escaping undetected had just plummeted. "The outpost might not be safe anymore," Reed admitted. "But we don't have much choice. We need supplies, communications, something to give us an edge." They pushed on, the mining tunnels eventually leading to a vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the rock wall. Reed went first, testing each rung before putting his weight on it. Lilac followed more slowly, her movements becoming increasingly labored. Halfway up the shaft, Reed heard it, the unmistakable sound of pursuers. The hunters had gained ground. He estimated they were perhaps 15 minutes behind, maybe less. "Almost there," he encouraged, reaching the top of the shaft and pushing open a heavy hatch. Cold, fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the distant rumble of engines. Powerful engines, the kind used in military dropships. Reed pulled himself out onto the surface, then reached down to help Lilac. As she emerged into the pale light of the colony's distant sun, he got his first clear look at her since they'd entered the tunnels. Her lavender skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and the makeshift bandage on her side was soaked through with a bluish fluid. She was deteriorating rapidly. "The outpost is just over that ridge," Reed said, pointing to a low hill about half a kilometer away. "Can you make it?" Lilac nodded determinedly, but as she took her first step, her legs buckled. Reed caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her with as much gentleness as urgency would allow. "I'll carry you," he said, settling her across his shoulders in a fireman's carry. "Just stay with me, okay?" He set off toward the ridge, each step an effort under his burden. The distant engine noise was growing louder. Whatever ships had arrived were deploying across the colony. Time was running out. As Reed crested the ridge, his hope turned to ash. The outpost, a small prefabricated structure designed for emergency shelter, was there, but so were 3 sleek shuttles bearing the insignia of the collectors. Armored figures moved with purpose around the perimeter, setting up what looked like monitoring equipment. "They found it first," Reed whispered, dropping to his stomach to avoid being silhouetted against the skyline. Lilac lay beside him, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. "No escape," she murmured. Reed refused to accept that. They had come too far, survived too much. Scanning the area, he noticed a narrow ravine cutting through the terrain to the right of the outpost. It might offer cover, a path to circle around the hunter's position. "There's always a way out," he insisted, his voice low but fierce. "I'm not giving up on you." Lilac's eyes, those strange, luminescent orbs that had first looked at him with such fear, now held something else. Trust, perhaps even hope. "Why care? Just alien." Reed met her gaze steadily. "You're a person. That's all that matters." The moment was shattered by a high-pitched whine directly behind them. Reed turned, already knowing what he would find. The hunter leader stood barely 10 meters away, its weapon leveled at Reed's chest. 2 more hunters flanked it, their armor scorched but intact. The leader spoke, its grinding voice somehow managing to convey smugness even through the language barrier. "It says," Lilac translated weakly, "the hunt was entertaining. Says you show unexpected resourcefulness. For human." Reed slowly reached for his sidearm, knowing it was a futile gesture but unwilling to surrender without a fight. "Also says," Lilac continued, "drop weapon or they take you apart. Piece by piece." Time seemed to slow as Reed weighed his options, each one worse than the last. His sidearm against 3 armored hunters was a suicide play. Running would mean leaving Lilac behind. Surrender meant death or worse for both of them. "Tell them I want to negotiate," Reed said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Lilac's eyes widened slightly, but she translated his words into the hunter's grinding language. The leader tilted its feline head, vertical pupils contracting to thin slits. It responded with what sounded like laughter, a harsh, grating sound that set Reed's teeth on edge. "Says, humans always negotiate when losing," Lilac translated. "Asks what you have to offer." Reed slowly raised his hands, making his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Tell them I have information about why the Earth scientists were so interested in you. Information their buyers would pay handsomely for." It was a desperate bluff. Reed knew nothing beyond what Lilac had already told him, but if he could buy them even a few minutes, something might change. Some opportunity might present itself. As Lilac relayed his words, a new sound cut through the air, the high-pitched whine of approaching craft. Everyone, hunters included, looked skyward as 3 sleek dropships bearing Earth military insignias crested the horizon, weapons systems visibly engaged. The hunter's leader barked an order, and one of its companions raised a communication device. The sudden arrival of Earth forces had shifted the dynamic entirely, but not necessarily in Reed and Lilac's favor. If the military had returned, it wasn't for a rescue mission. They wanted something from the colony or someone. "New problem," Lilac whispered, her voice weaker than before. "Earth ships, not here for you." Reed understood immediately. "They're here for you, to recover their investment." The lead hunter snarled something, gesturing sharply at Reed and Lilac. The message was clear even without translation. Move or be moved. In that moment of distraction, Reed made his decision. He lunged forward, not toward his weapon, but toward the nearest hunter, slamming into its midsection with all his strength. The creature staggered back, caught off guard by the suicidal attack. Reed grabbed for the alien weapon attached to its belt, his fingers closing around something that felt like a handle. Chaos erupted. The leader fired, the shot grazing Reed's shoulder and sending white-hot pain lancing down his arm. He wrenched the stolen device free and rolled away, coming up in a defensive crouch between the hunters and Lilac. The device in his hand wasn't a weapon. It was some kind of scanner or communication tool. Useless in a fight. Reed backed up slowly, keeping Lilac behind him as the hunters advanced, their postures radiating deadly intent. The Earth dropships were closing fast, their weapons undoubtedly locked on the hunter vessels. Whatever truce had existed between the two groups was clearly over. "We need to move, now," Reed urged, helping Lilac to her feet. "When the shooting starts between them, we make for the ravine." Lilac swayed, clutching at her side. "Can't. Run. You won't have to." Reed made a split-second decision and lifted her again, ignoring the stabbing pain from his wounded shoulder. "Just hold on." The first explosion rocked the ground as one of the Earth ships fired on a hunter vessel. The lead hunter turned its attention skyward, barking orders into a communication device. Its two companions hesitated, torn between pursuing their quarry and responding to the new threat. Reed didn't waste the opportunity. He ran, each stride sending jolts of agony through his injured shoulder, Lilac's slight weight feeling heavier with every step. Behind them, the hunters roared in fury, but the chaos of the aerial battle had become their immediate concern. The ravine was closer than it had appeared from the ridge. A jagged tear in the moon's surface, perhaps 20 meters deep with sheer rock walls. No way down that Reed could see, which meant no escape route. "Dead end," he gasped, setting Lilac down as gently as possible while scanning desperately for options. Lilac looked up at him, her luminescent eyes focusing with visible effort. "Not end." She pointed to a narrow fissure in the ravine wall, barely visible among the shadows and rock formations. "There." Reed helped her toward it, glancing back frequently to check for pursuit. The battle had expanded, with more ships arriving, both Earth forces and what must have been hunter reinforcements. The sky above the colony was alive with weapons fire and explosions. The fissure was tight, barely wide enough for Reed to squeeze through sideways. Lilac, with her slighter build, went first, disappearing into the darkness. Reed followed, scraping his injured shoulder painfully against the rock wall. The passage opened suddenly into a much larger cavern. Artificial, not natural. Soft blue light emanated from panels set into the walls, illuminating what could only be described as a laboratory. Equipment of unknown design lined the walls, and in the center stood a circular platform ringed with control panels. "What is this place?" Reed whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Lilac moved with renewed purpose toward the central platform. "Not Earth. Not hunters. Older." Her fingers skimmed across one of the control panels, leaving faint trails of luminescence in their wake. "My people were here before." Reed stared in disbelief. "Your people built this. How long ago?" "Centuries," Lilac replied, her movements becoming more confident as she worked the unfamiliar controls. "Observation post. Study outpost." The implications hit Reed like a physical blow. Lilac's people hadn't been discovered by chance. They'd been observing humanity and other species for centuries, maintaining hidden outposts throughout explored space. No wonder both Earth authorities and the collectors wanted her so badly. The knowledge she carried wasn't just valuable, it was potentially civilization-altering. "Can you use this place to call for help?" Reed asked, checking the fissure entrance nervously. The sounds of battle still raged outside, but it was only a matter of time before someone discovered their hiding place. Lilac's expression changed, a look Reed couldn't quite interpret. "Can do more than call." She placed both hands on the central console, and the blue light throughout the cavern intensified. "Need your help?" "Anything," Reed said without hesitation. "Blood," she said simply. "Small amount." "DNA." Reed didn't question her. He drew his combat knife and made a small cut on his palm, letting several drops fall where she indicated on the console. The moment his blood touched the surface, it seemed to be absorbed, the material changing color from blue to a deep purple. The entire cavern hummed with energy, the floor beneath their feet vibrating slightly. Above the central platform, a holographic display flickered to life. Star charts, data streams, and symbols Reed couldn't begin to comprehend. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the growing hum. Lilac's face was transformed by the light, her features sharp and somehow more alien than before. Activation protocol. Defense system. Outside, the battle reached a crescendo, the particularly violent explosion causing dust and small rocks to rain down from the cavern ceiling. Through the fissure entrance, Reed caught glimpses of ships, both Earth and hunter vessels, falling from the sky, disabled by some invisible force. "You're shooting them down?" Reed asked incredulously. "Not shooting," Lilac corrected, her voice stronger than he'd heard it since they'd met. "Neutralizing." "Technology. Shutdown." Her eyes met his, suddenly urgent. "Not much time. System recognizes you now. Friend, not threat." The implication was clear. "But not you?" "Why not?" "I am. Key. Sacrifice." She smiled faintly at his confusion. Was never prisoner. Was sentinel. Waiting. Before Reed could process this revelation, the sound of movement came from the fissure entrance. The lead hunter squeezed through, its armor scorched and damaged, but its weapon very much operational. It snarled something that the translation device on its belt rendered into broken English. "Stand away from console. Human. Specimen property of collective." Reed moved instinctively between the hunter and Lilac, his sidearm raised despite knowing it would be ineffective against the creature's armor. "She belongs to no one." The hunter's vertical pupils narrowed as it raised its weapon. "Then die with it." A flash of blue light erupted from the central console, so intense that Reed was momentarily blinded. When his vision cleared, the hunter stood frozen in place, its weapon half-raised, like a statue carved from alien flesh. "Time lock," Lilac explained, her voice now distant and echoing strangely. "He perceived nothing until I release." The cavern's vibration had increased to a violent shuddering. Pieces of equipment were detaching from the walls, floating upward as if gravity itself had been suspended. In the center of it all, Lilac stood transformed. Her wounds seemed to have vanished, her entire body suffused with the same blue light that filled the cavern. "What's happening to you?" Reed asked, reaching for her but stopping as his hand passed through her arm as if through smoke. "Becoming what I was meant to be," she replied. "This form, temporary. Mission complete." Reed struggled to understand. "Mission? What mission?" Lilac's luminescent eyes fixed on his, filled with an ancient wisdom that made Reed's breath catch in his throat. "To find one who would help without reward. One who sees person, not species." Her form flickered, becoming less substantial with each passing second. "To find humanity's potential." Reed stood transfixed as Lilac's form continued to shimmer and dissolve, the blue light pulsing through her translucent body like a heartbeat. The ancient technology surrounding them responded to her transformation, systems activating in sequences that seemed almost ceremonial. "I don't understand," Reed said, his voice barely audible over the hum of energy filling the cavern. "You were sent here to test us." Lilac's smile was ethereal, her features becoming less distinct with each passing moment. "Not test. Observe. Learn if humanity ready." "Ready for what?" "For truth. For contact." Her voice echoed strangely, as if coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "My people watched many worlds, many species. Some destroy themselves, some destroy others." Her gaze, though increasingly insubstantial, held his with surprising intensity. Humanity stands at crossroads. The implications staggered Reed. All this time, he'd thought he was protecting a victim, a refugee, when in reality, he'd been the one being evaluated. His actions, his choices, had been observed and judged by a representative of an ancient, advanced civilization. The hunters, the Earth forces, they all knew what you were. Reed asked. Suspected, never knew. Lilac's form flickered more violently. Hunters collect valuable things. Earth scientists study powerful things. Neither understand. The forgotten hunter remained frozen in its time block, an unwitting witness to a revelation it would never comprehend. Outside, the sounds of battle had ceased entirely, replaced by an eerie silence. Whatever technology Lilac had activated had brought the conflict to a complete standstill. "What happens now?" Reed asked, a strange mixture of awe and loss tightening his chest as Lilac continued to fade. In the short time they'd spent together, he'd come to care for her, alien or not, sentinel or not. The thought of her simply disappearing felt wrong. "Now," Lilac said, her voice gaining a resonance that seemed to vibrate through Reed's very bones. "Choice." The central platform beneath her dissolved feet began to glow more intensely, holographic displays expanding to fill the cavern. Reed saw images of Earth, of colonies, of humanity at its best and worst, helping one another, fighting wars, creating art, destroying environments, a complete and unfiltered record of human history. "Your choice, Alex Reed," Lilac continued, using his full name for the first time. "You represent humanity in this moment. You decide." Reed's mouth went dry. "Decide what?" "If contact begins, if my people reveal themselves." Her form had almost completely dissolved now, little more than a humanoid outline of blue light. "Or if we wait longer, watch longer." The weight of the decision crushed down on Reed's shoulders. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, or a philosopher. He had no right to make such a monumental choice on behalf of his entire species. And yet here he was, selected by criteria he couldn't begin to understand, faced with a responsibility he'd never asked for. "Why me?" he whispered. "I'm nobody important." "Importance measured differently by my people," Lilac replied. "You helped one who could offer nothing in return. You saw person where others saw property." The blue light pulsed stronger. Such compassion, rare in universe. Reed thought of the Earth forces who had abandoned him during the evacuation, of the scientists who had treated Lilac as an experimental subject, of the hunters who saw her only as valuable merchandise. Then he thought of the good he'd witnessed throughout his life, strangers helping strangers, sacrifices made for others, moments of unexpected kindness in the darkest circumstances. "I can't speak for all of humanity," Reed said finally. "We're not ready to meet your people, not all of us anyway. We're still fighting amongst ourselves, still exploiting each other, but we're learning. We're growing." He met the luminous gaze of what remained of Lilac. "We deserve the chance to do better." Something like approval flickered across Lilac's dissolving features. Honesty, wisdom, hope. Her voice had become almost musical, layered with harmonics beyond human hearing. "Good answer, Alex Reed." The cavern began to shake more violently, pieces of equipment crumbling, and floating upward into a vortex of energy centered where Lilac had stood. The holographic displays flickered and expanded, showing images of stars, galaxies, and fragment of a vast consciousness, temporarily housed in a physical form designed to interact with humans. The energy vortex collapsed suddenly, the blue light retracting into the central platform before blinking out entirely. The ancient technology shut down in rapid sequence, leaving only emergency lighting casting faint shadows through the cavern. In the abrupt silence, Reed became aware of movement. The hunter was free from its time lock, disoriented but quickly regaining its bearings. It raised its weapon, targeting systems locking onto Reed. Before it could fire, a new sound filled the cavern, the unmistakable rhythm of Earth military boots. A tactical team breached the fissure entrance, weapons raised and aimed at both Reed and the hunter. "Stand down, both of you," commanded a voice Reed recognized. Captain Torres, his former commanding officer, the same one who had left him behind during the evacuation. The hunter snarled defiance, swinging its weapon toward the new threat. It never completed the motion. Precision fire from the tactical team dropped it where it stood, its alien body crumpling to the cavern floor. Torres approached Reed cautiously, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Sergeant Reed, you survived." Her gaze swept the cavern, taking in the alien technology. "Where is the specimen?" Reed straightened to his full height, meeting her eyes without flinching. "There was no specimen, Captain. Only a visitor." Torres's expression hardened. Don't play games, Reed. Our sensors detected massive energy readings from this location. Readings consistent with the alien's biometric signature. She's gone, Reed said simply. And she left a message. What message? Torres demanded. Reed allowed himself a small smile, feeling the lingering warmth of Lilac's parting communication. That we're being watched. That we have 50 years to prove ourselves worthy of what comes next. Torres's face paled slightly as the implication sank in. You made first contact. Official first contact. No, Reed corrected. They'd been contacting us for centuries. We just never realized it. He gestured to the now dormant technology surrounding them. And they've left us some homework. In the days that followed, as Reed was debriefed by increasingly high-ranking officials, as the ancient outpost was quarantined and studied, as the hunter vessels retreated from Earth space entirely, he kept one final secret to himself. In that last moment of connection with Lilac, or whatever vast consciousness she had been a part of, he had received not just a message but a gift. Knowledge. Understanding. A small fraction of her perfect memory, imprinted directly onto his mind. Star charts, technical schematics, linguistic patterns, information that would help humanity prepare, if used wisely. And with that knowledge came responsibility. Reed knew his journey hadn't ended in that cavern. It had only begun. Somewhere among the stars, Lilac's people were waiting, watching, and he had 50 years to help humanity get ready for their arrival. As he stood on the observation deck of the military transport carrying him back to Earth, Reed gazed out at the stars and whispered words only he could hear, "Until we meet again." In the vast darkness of space, for just a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of blue light, like an acknowledgement, or perhaps a promise returned. 3 years after his return to Earth, Reed found himself stationed at the newly established interstellar research facility outside Geneva. The sprawling complex had been built specifically to study the technology recovered from the alien outpost, now referred to in classified documents as the Sentinel Site. Official records listed Reed as a security consultant. In reality, he was much more. The translation matrix is still giving us problems, Dr. Eliza Chen said, frustration evident in her voice as she gestured at the holographic display floating above her workstation. We've made progress with the basic syntax, but the conceptual framework is just beyond us. Reed studied the alien symbols, their intricate patterns shifting subtly as they rotated in the air. Thanks to Lilac's parting gift, he understood more than he let on, carefully. Guiding the research team without revealing the full extent of his knowledge, the world wasn't ready for everything at once. Try approaching it differently, he suggested. Their language isn't just about communication, it's about perception. Each symbol represents not just a word but a viewpoint, a way of seeing reality. Dr. Chen gave him a curious look. That's surprisingly insightful for a soldier. Reed shrugged, a gesture that had become his standard response to such observations. I spent more time with the visitor than anyone else. The truth was both simpler and infinitely more complex. Since his return, Reed had experienced what the medical staff called progressive cognitive enhancement, his brain gradually adapting to and unpacking the vast repository of information Lilac had left behind. It came in dreams, in sudden flashes of insight, in moments when his concentration drifted. The gift was revealing itself in carefully measured doses, as if designed to prevent overwhelming his human mind. Have you been cleared to see the latest findings from the astronomical division? Dr. Chen asked, changing subjects. When Reed shook his head, she continued, they've identified 7 star systems with signatures matching the energy patterns from the Sentinel site. All of them previously catalogued but unremarkable. All of them now showing signs of, well, for lack of a better word, activity. Reed felt a familiar chill run down his spine. They're waking up. That's the working theory, Dr. Chen confirmed. Dormant outposts, similar to the one you found, activating in sequence. The question is why now, after all this time? Reed knew the answer but kept it to himself. 50 years. A timeline had been established, a countdown initiated. These activations were just the beginning, carefully orchestrated steps in a process designed to gradually introduce humanity to a much larger cosmic community. Later that evening, in the solitude of his quarters, Reed reviewed his private journal, a handwritten record of everything he could remember about his encounter with Lilac. He'd been advised against digital documentation, aware that even the highest security clearance wouldn't protect such information from curious eyes. 3 years, he murmured to himself, flipping through pages filled with sketches, notes, and remembered conversations. 47 to go. A soft chime from his communication device interrupted his thoughts. The message was brief but urgent. Visitor in medical. Your presence requested. 10 minutes later, Reed stood in the observation room of the facility's medical wing, staring through reinforced glass at a scene he'd never expected to witness. On the bed lay a young woman with pale blue skin, unconscious but stable according to the monitors surrounding her. She had been found in a stasis pod that had crashed in the Siberian wilderness, the pod's design unmistakably similar to technology from the Sentinel site. Is she? Reed began, unable to complete the question. Dr. Patel, the lead physician, shook his head. Not the same species as your visitor. Similar physiological characteristics, but distinct differences in cellular structure and neural patterns. He hesitated before adding, she's carrying this. He handed Reed a small crystalline object, roughly the size and shape of a river stone. The moment Reed's fingers touched it, the crystal illuminated from within, glowing with the now familiar blue light. It wouldn't activate for any of us, Dr. Patel said, his voice hushed with wonder. Just you. Reed closed his fingers around the crystal, feeling a gentle warmth spread up his arm. In his mind, a voice spoke, not Lilac's, but similar in its musical quality. Guardian Reed, the observers have made their decision. Phase 2 begins now. The crystal projected images directly into Reed's consciousness, glimpses of other worlds, other species, all facing similar moments of choice, of contact, of recognition. Humanity was not alone in this transition. Across the galaxy, other Sentinels had found other Guardians, other beings who had demonstrated the capacity for compassion beyond borders of species or origin. What does it mean? Dr. Patel asked, noticing Reed's distant expression. Reed carefully chose his words. It means we're not just being tested. We're being prepared. In the months that followed, the blue-skinned visitor, who called herself Nira, became an official emissary, the first acknowledged representative of non-Earth intelligence. Unlike Lilac, she made no secret of her purpose or origins. She spoke openly of a galactic coalition of species, a community that humanity might one day join if they continued to demonstrate growth and compassion. Reed served as her primary liaison, a role that felt both natural and preordained. The knowledge Lilac had gifted him made him uniquely qualified to understand Nira's explanations of technologies and concepts beyond human development. Together, they established protocols for the gradual introduction of advanced sciences, medical treatments first, then sustainable energy production, finally propulsion systems that would allow humanity to explore beyond their solar system. Your people progress quickly, Nira observed as they walked through a field of experimental crops grown using alien botanical principles. The plants thrived without pesticides or artificial fertilizers, their natural defenses enhanced through genetic suggestions rather than modifications, perhaps too quickly. Reed understood her concern. We're an impatient species, always have been. Impatience can lead to carelessness, Nira replied. The coalition has seen promising species destroy themselves with technologies they weren't emotionally mature enough to wield. Is that why the 50-year timeline? Reed asked. To force us to pace ourselves. Nira's expression, still alien despite months of interaction, softened slightly. To give you time to understand that technology without wisdom is merely sophisticated destruction. She touched one of the plants gently. Your lilac saw something in you, Alex Reed. Something worth nurturing. 5 years into the contact protocol, Earth had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The existence of extraterrestrial intelligence was now common knowledge, though details remained classified. International conflicts had diminished as former adversaries found common purpose in preparing for a wider cosmic role. Resources once dedicated to weapons development were increasingly channeled into education, environmental restoration, and social welfare. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Isolationist movements sprang up, advocating for minimal alien interaction. Religious institutions struggled to incorporate the new reality into their doctrines. Corporations feared the economic disruption of advanced technologies. Through it all, Reed continued his work, guiding where he could, learning always. The knowledge Lilac had gifted him revealed itself in layers, each new understanding building upon the last. He came to realize that this progressive revelation was intentional, designed to keep pace with humanity's collective growth, neither too fast nor too slow. On the 10th anniversary of his encounter with Lilac, Reed returned to the moon, where it had all begun. The colony had been rebuilt, not as a military outpost, but as a research station and diplomatic hub. The Sentinel site itself remained active, its ancient systems now partially integrated with human technology. As he stood in the cavern where Lilac had disappeared, Reed felt a familiar presence, not physical, but unmistakable nonetheless. "You've returned," he said aloud, knowing she would hear. The air shimmered slightly, and though no visible form appeared, the sensation of communication was clear. "As have you, Guardian." "I'm not sure I deserve that title," Reed admitted. "I'm just doing my best to help humanity prepare." "That is precisely what a Guardian does," came the response, warm with what might have been amusement. "You guide without controlling. You protect without restricting growth." Reed gestured to the technology surrounding them. 10 years down, 40 to go. Will we be ready? The presence that was once Lilac seemed to envelop him briefly. Ready for what? Alex Reed. To join the coalition. To take our place among the stars. Perhaps that is not the goal, came the surprising response. Perhaps the journey itself is what matters. The growth, the learning, the becoming. Reed considered this. Then what happens after 50 years? Another choice, Lilac explained. Always another choice. The universe offers infinite paths, infinite possibilities. The coalition does not dictate, it invites. As Reed left the cavern, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity wasn't being molded to fit some predetermined role in a cosmic hierarchy. They were being given the opportunity to define that role for themselves, to contribute their unique perspective to the greater community of intelligent life. Back on Earth, he shared these insights with Nira, who had become not just an emissary, but a friend. "Your Lilac was wise," she said. "Most guardians are chosen for their ability to protect or lead. You were chosen for your capacity to understand." Reed smiled at the irony. A soldier selected for his compassion rather than his combat skills. "The universe contains enough destroyers," Nira replied. "Builders are far more rare." As years passed and humanity continued its cautious journey toward the stars, Reed remained at the center of the contact protocol, a bridge between worlds. The knowledge Lilac had gifted him continued to unfold, revealing not just scientific principles but philosophical insights, historical contexts, cultural understandings, a comprehensive introduction to a universe far more diverse and interconnected than anyone had imagined. On his deathbed, nearly 48 years after his encounter on that distant moon, Reed was visited one final time by the presence he had come to know so well. "The timeline is almost complete," he whispered, his voice weak but his mind still sharp. "For you, perhaps," came the gentle response. "For humanity, it is just beginning." Reed smiled, understanding at last the true nature of the gift he had been given, the role he had played. He was not the endpoint, but a connection, not the destination, but a waypoint on a much longer journey. "Tell them I'm proud of how far we've come," he said, his eyes closing for the final time. As his consciousness faded, Reed felt himself expanding, transforming, becoming something more than he had been. The knowledge Lilac had shared with him wasn't just information, it was evolution, preparation for what came next. In his final moment, Alex Reed understood what it meant to truly transcend the boundaries of species and form. He had begun as a human soldier abandoned on a distant moon. He ended as a guardian of humanity's future among the stars, his essence joining the vast consciousness that had once taken the form of a lavender-skinned alien girl. Somewhere in the universe, a new sentinel was awakening, preparing to find their own guardian, to offer their own choice. The cycle continued, as it had for millennia, as it would for millennia more. Species meeting species, understanding growing, the cosmic community expanding one compassionate heart at a time. And in that endless cycle of growth and connection, the story of the abandoned alien girl and the human soldier who chose to help her would be told and retold, a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearances to the person within. The first step on humanity's long journey to the stars.